It's 4:20 somewhere right now. That somewhere is right here. So hello and welcome to the Cannabis Show. I'm producer Vince, and here's your host, Ricardo Baca.
I love it. Having your name said like that, I think everybody needs to experience their name said like that. Hey, thank you, Vince. And to everybody joining us today, welcome to the Cannabist Show, where we talk about all things weed.
That's all things.
And that is the serious marijuana news and the not always serious reviews and videos and everything else. In fact, if you pop onto the site right now, that's thecannabist.co. You'll see stories about an Arizona lawmaker who withdrew a bill restricting medical marijuana access.
Arizona not restricting something?
About legal marijuana markets opening up ownership requirements to out-of-state parties.
That'll get kind of interesting.
And about a bill in Colorado that proposes pesticide-free marijuana labeling.
Thank you, Baca and Magoya.
Oh, well, you know, we do not take, full responsibility for that, but it's been fun reporting on it. But, of course, producer Vince is here in the studio today with me. Dude, how have you been?
I've been pretty good, pumping you up with a little bit of false modesty, though, there. I think you had more to do with it than you want to admit. But boots on the ground here in San Francisco, getting ready for Super Bowl 50 between, our own Denver Broncos and, that other team from the Eastern Seaboard. How have you been, Ricardo?
Life is good, Vince. Yeah, it's gorgeous being in Colorado. I love that the days are slowly getting longer. Thank goodness for it. I'm ready for the weekend weed. Are you ready for the weekend weed, Vince?
I'm ready with one caveat. Can we start back at home sweet home in good old CO?
All right. Just because you requested it, we are starting this weekend weed in Colorado, where a federal judge recently removed the governor of the state and other state and county officials as defendants in a high-profile racketeering lawsuit that is attempting to stop legal marijuana in Colorado and elsewhere. So a family of Pueblo County horse ranchers and an anti-drug organization based in Washington, D.C. sued the state officials and businesses to stop construction of a nearby cannabis cultivation facility, claiming that federal pot laws supersede Colorado's pot laws.
But a United States district judge saw things differently and sided with previous federal court rulings and said that government entities are not subject to racketeering claims and, quote, that there is no private right of action under the U.S. Constitution Supremacy Clause itself, end quote. But the lawsuit is still moving forward, right, Ricardo?
Exactly. It is moving forward. A lawyer for the plaintiffs told me that the case will proceed against the other named defendants, including the Black Hawk pot shop that grows its cannabis in Pueblo County and some of the companies it's done business with.
And I loved this quote from Pueblo County Commissioner Sal Pace, who was on the first ever live show recently and was one of the defendants dropped from the suit. Quote, "It's pretty clear it was a frivolous lawsuit being pushed by an ideological agenda, and the net result is it costing Pueblo County taxpayers time and money to fight it," end quote.
And when I asked Pace and his colleagues how much taxpayers paid to defend the county from that suit, they said it was more than $100,000.
Ugh.
Yikes. So, elsewhere in the week in weed events, comedian Chelsea Handler has a new series on Netflix, and it's called Chelsea Does. And in one of the episodes, titled Chelsea Does Drugs, Handler does a lot of drugs and talks about it.
And she really strained herself coming up with that episode title. It is pretty funny, though. One of my favorite segments of that show is about how she thinks her dog can tell when she's high. She said, "Chunk looks at me with judgment." And she talks about how he always judges her when she's stoned or drunk or whatever. And I agree. My cat, Khloe Kardashian, she definitely judges me when I'm a little too high in the evening.
Dude, I love that you have a cat named Khloe Kardashian, for one. That's awesome. But it was funny, and I've also thought the same thing about my dog. So Winston, if you're listening to this podcast right now, no, I'm not high, so stop judging me. But another topic Chelsea tackles is sex and weed. And while she's hosting a very stony dinner party with infused courses and passed joints, her friends talk about sex while stoned. Why they like it, why they don't like it. Vince, were you surprised when Chelsea said that she doesn't like stoned sex?
As someone who's experienced stoned sex, yes, I'm very surprised that she didn't enjoy it. I mean, Everybody tweet at me, tweet at Ricardo especially if you enjoy stone sex. I mean,
why me especially? What the hell?
I just figured you could use a little bit of Twitter love this week. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm at Bruvs if you want to hit me up. So yeah, apparently you're tweeting at me.
Yep. Okay. But Chelsea did say, when I'm stoned, I don't ever want to do anything sexual. And that's her prerogative. It's her right. So more power to you, Chelsea. It's just not for everybody.
You know, my favorite part of the episode came at the end when Chelsea and two of her friends travel to Peru to participate in an ayahuasca ceremony. You know, and like cannabis, ayahuasca is a mind-altering psychoactive plant that is often administered by shamans in South America. You know, and I've had plenty of friends tell me about their own experiences, you know, going to Peru and taking a plane and then hopping on a boat and going down the Amazon into some remote tribal village where, you know, a shaman greets you and eventually administers this ayahuasca tea. And it's always sounded so mysterious and so spectacular. I mean, granted, there's vomiting and there's a lot of things involved, but there's also, you know, life-changing epiphanies and really incredible stories coming out of it. And what happens to Chelsea and her friends, I don't want to give away too much, but it's pretty amazing to watch it happen real time.
Well, there's two things that I'm learning out of this. Is one, I'm glad that you didn't make me say ayahuasca. I really appreciate that, Ricardo. And second, you know, Chelsea's always introducing and encouraging people to do new things, and there's another new one to put on my list. Thank you.
I know, right? You know, she is a wild child. Now, some of you might have tried the THC-infused products made by my first guest. Weed topicals don't get you stoned, but they do have effects that are hard to explain, and many people I know swear by them, absolutely swear by them. So help me in welcoming my first guest, the founder of Apothecanna lotions, James Kennedy, to the Cannabis Show. How's it going, dude?
Good, Ricardo. How are you doing?
Good to see you again. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the couch.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah, the studio's looking great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
This is what we're asking everybody now. First thing. So, sativa or indica?
Sativa. I like that little bit of stimulation. I think also the flavors that you find in sativas are a little more citrusy, a little bit more uplifting, and so that's what I usually steer towards, but nothing against the indicas.
You're not hating?
No, I mean, you know, they're definitely good for after 4 o'clock.
After 4 o'clock, yeah. Like no caffeine after 4,
right,
no
exactly,
sativas after 4.
Exactly, yeah, you know, it's like pairing coffee and sativa. You know, that's how it goes for me.
It does make sense, yeah. Well, James, obviously, Apothecanna is unveiling its new packaging right here, right now on the Cannabis Show. Give us a look and tell us about the redesign and what the reason was behind it.
Well, okay, so we've been in the, you know, kind of our initial packaging for 5 years now. No, actually a little bit longer than that. You know, just as times have kind of changed, people's perception of, you know, whether this is a cannabis product or a wellness product, you know, we really wanted to firmly root ourselves in projecting wellness. This isn't just a lotion with weed in it. This is something that you use for, you know, we have a lot of different varieties, but you use it for, you know, points throughout the day when you need, you know, this one, for example, is our calming. Lavender, chamomile, frankincense, and cannabis in there, you know, obviously, but really the functionality of that is what we want to highlight. So we went with these bright, kind of bold color bars. This is actually a brand new product here. This is our body oils, but wanted to give people kind of that sense of these products live as family. So we have products that are pain relieving, for calming, just for kind of everyday usage. So a lot of the redesign was, you know, really trying to stay true to our roots, not changing everything. We don't want people to not be able to recognize the brand. So keeping a lot of those elements, you know, the same. We got the leaf on the front, but, you know, we added some of those other things I think people like to know about. Gluten-free, non-GMO, never any animal testing, you know, and some of those stuff like that. It's a vegan product, so we put all that information on the bottle too.
Well, congratulations. It looks good.
Yeah, it was a fun process. It's been taking a while, but We did all custom bottles in Florida, which was a cool process to keep it domestic, and worked with a great label vendor out in New York, and really like kind of brought some people that would have never touched cannabis 2 years ago into kind of our supply side of things, and that was a really it was cool.
Well, it looks like a mainstream beauty product you'd find in the grocery store, and I'm sure that was part of the intention.
And kind of with this as well. We've been selling in dispensaries in Colorado, medical and recreational, since 2010. Recently went to California, Oregon, and Washington with the medical products, but we're also releasing our CBD-only products, which are available online and for anyone to be able to purchase, and that's hemp-derived CBD. So that is really bridging into a much wider
well, there you go.
market there.
Well, let's talk about topical marijuana in general, because as I said earlier, I know some folks who swear by these salves, oils, lotions. I have a friend who said it saved his life, just the ability for joint pain, joint relief pain. Others say it doesn't work on them no matter how many brands they try. So how would you advise somebody who's trying topical marijuana for maybe the first time?
You want to. I think there's more to it than just the the topical marijuana. What do you really? What is your issue that you're going for? Is it an irritation? I think a lot of times when products don't work for people is they start getting some unrealistic expectations about it's not going to heal a broken leg. It's not going to do. But
why not? Come on, is that too much to ask, James? When are we getting that lotion?
We'll get closer and closer, but. For most of our products, our best-selling products, they do have some other ingredients. So, shop for it like you would shop for any other product. Something that you want to use every day. I think a lot of problems with some of the salves and things like that is, maybe it's a good question for your wife, but how often do you use like an oily salve in a part of, anywhere on your body? With a lotion or something that's more spreadable, that's a little bit easier to kind of make that transition and to think of these as everyday products, not just like a cannabis treatment or product. I would also recommend trying it with massage is really fantastic because you really want to get your mind and everything into it. And a lot of people, just picking up the bottle and seeing cannabis, they're making some connections already and thinking about wellness. There's a lot of success stories out there, and I would say much more frequently than not, we're getting emails, calls about, wow, I can't believe this actually worked, rather than someone saying that they didn't really get anything out of it. So the response is generally pretty positive.
It's a trip, and the massage part, of course, our listeners and our viewers have heard us talk about the weed massage over at Lodo Massage here in Denver, and they do use exclusively Apothecanna products, so that's worth noting. I know one of the newer trends, especially in legal cannabis markets, is homemade topicals. Now that people have figured out that perfect canna butter that they love to make, and if you haven't figured it out yet, I might tip you off to the recipe on the Cannabist because it's a fantastic canna butter. But now people are starting to experiment by making these salves and these lotions at home. So, is there maybe one tip that you've learned through your experimentation that you could pass along to our viewers?
Well, I think consistency is something that's a little bit more difficult to achieve for, kind of the newbie at all.
I would imagine.
Like, hey, wow, this was fantastic one time, and then the next time, it always happens with edibles. Like, I made this batch, it was really great, and then next time everyone was on the floor, and then next time no one really, felt anything.
Right.
So, there's definitely ways that you can kind of start from scratch and make it like the same way as canna butter with, and that's how we started out with, cooking cannabis down with olive oil and all of that. But really, when it comes to the extractions that are available on the market today, if you start with a CO2 oil, that's going to infuse into any oil beautifully, and much more precisely what the dosage is going to be.
Sure.
So it's really, I think, as many elements that you can simplify down, then it starts getting a little bit personal. Do you like lavender? Do you like those other ingredients? Because chances are, if from an aromatherapeutic point of view, if you respond well to it, chances are it's going to work well with your body.
That makes sense. And aromatherapy is centuries old, and so you're employing some of these techniques now.
Yeah.
James, great to have you on the show. We're going to talk with you a little bit more here in a few minutes.
All right, fantastic.
Now, before we introduce our next guest, I'm throwing to our very own physician of fatties, Professor Pat, for this week's entry in the new Cannabis lexicon.
Eighth of an ounce of cannabis weighed out to 3.5 grams. This is perhaps the most common unit of measurement for cannabis in the United States, but the rest of the world sticks with grams and kilos. For example, quote, I don't want a whole ounce of one strain. I like to go to the dispensary and get 8/8 instead, so I can try everything.
All right, thank you for that, Professor Pat. On to our next guest, who is the CEO of marijuana compliance business I Comply, and he's also a Cannabis Business Association board member. It's my pleasure to welcome Mark Slaugh to the Cannabist Show. How's it going, Mark?
Going well.
Did I get your last name correct?
You did, Slaugh.
Oh,
That's it.
good, okay. I meant to ask you before the show and totally spaced it. So,
It's
Mark,
okay.
sativa or indica?
You know,
Where are you
I've
at?
got to go hybrid. I'm somewhere
a
in
little
the
bit
middle.
between, huh?
Yeah, you know, you get your dominances, either left or right, and I think I try to walk that middle road and generally pick like a sativa dominant hybrid.
Sure.
But I think after 4 p.m., like James said, you might want to go a little more on the indica side. But
Oh, nice.
White Widow, Cali Mist, some of those hybrids in the middle, some of my favorites.
You know, I don't smoke weed. I only eat it and vaporize, but White Widow is my favorite smelling weed.
Yeah.
Just out of the jar. I love White Widow and Golden Goat. Those are both great.
Classics.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
welcome.
Pleasure to meet you. I know we've never met before, but I wanted to start, since you're with CBA, what are you guys passionate about? You know, we have a brand new legislative season here in Colorado. So what are you guys going into this season passionate about?
Absolutely. I think there's a few big issues that we want to tackle as an industry as we move forward that might be somewhat antiquated and really need to transition over. One of those issues I think that we're looking to take on is really around the limitations for out-of-state visitors in purchasing here in Colorado. So if you have a Colorado ID, you're allowed to buy up to 1 ounce of marijuana. And
Right.
constitutionally, any 21 and up adult can carry up to 1 ounce of marijuana. However, you're limited if you're from out of state on purchasing only 7 grams.
Sure,
Now-
and that's the way it's been since the sales started in January of 2014.
Exactly,
right?
and that's a lot of the reasons because we were the first ones out the gate. And so
Sure.
in the effort of sort of preventing federal interference, we didn't want to encourage diversion out of state. So even though it's legal for someone to pop to 4 different stores on the same block on Broadway to pick up their cannabis, we wanted to be a little more cautious. But in talking to legislators, they've done the research, and no other state is doing this currently that has legalized recreational marijuana. So we
Oh,
feel
really?
like
None of the others have this disparity between what locals and out-of-staters can buy?
exactly, they're all allowed to buy the same amount.
Sure.
Just given what that local law is. So this might be an area of that's become antiquated or old that we no longer need. And so we really want to revamp that, especially because there's equivalency standards now in place. So purchasers here very soon are only going to be able to purchase 8 edibles to 1 ounce, for example. And that new equivalency standard is certainly limiting the amount of product that can go out as quickly as it can. So if we can possibly balance that on the other side, I think it would be good policy to allow people to buy their legal amount.
Well, and I think this is, I'm so glad you brought it up, because this is something we haven't talked a lot about on the show, equivalency. And I think people hear that word, people start thinking about converting the milligrams of activated THC in an edible or concentrate to that overall ounce amount.
Yeah.
Can you give us the easy, you know, why are they doing this, and what does CBA think about these equivalency standards?
Sure. So shortly after we legalized recreational sales of marijuana, there was a large push, I think, from the more conservative faction of the stakeholders to really look at what are the limitations. Because if you're looking at milligrams, thousandths of a gram, should somebody be able to come in from out of state and buy 70, 100 milligram edibles for their 7 gram equivalent? And the state really had some concerns with that. So they essentially passed a bill and commissioned a group to do a study around our production capacities and what we can produce, and looking at the process to try and determine what is equivalent to 1 ounce when it comes to both concentrates as well as edibles. And in that process, I think they interviewed less than 20 infused products manufacturers, sadly, and put together a report that really set these standards in place, and I think they're a little bit restrictive. So even though you're allowed to buy 28 grams of marijuana per ounce, that's street grams for those out there.
Sure.
But you can, you're also allowed now, or very soon, to only buy 8 grams of edibles, for example. So it's really going to limit what people could have bought in the past, and we feel like maybe 20, 25 would have been a better standard. But that's how it came about, and it's still an ongoing battle, especially for businesses and consumers.
Do you think that the legislature will address that this session?
We hope so. You never know, and there's only a few bills out right now. Every year we tackle somewhere in the upwards of 30 bills each legislative session.
30 cannabis-related bills.
Easily. Some of them die. You try to kill Bill as much as possible, but you also have some that survive and get passed through as legislation, and that legislation turns into regulation. And it's like clockwork, and it's a moving target. So this year's conversations could become next year's legislation. And
Absolutely.
Been doing this since 08, 09, and it's like clockwork. And we're only seeing that increase with recreational marijuana.
Well, let's talk about a couple of those bills that have been announced. What we know they're talking about, I think one of these this week. You know, the new legislative session just began, and obviously lots of new cannabis-related bills, as you mentioned. But one of the high-profile bills people are talking about would allow marijuana to be purchased and possibly consumed at special events here in Colorado outside of the licensed shop, which I think you know, regulators have been very strict about that to this point. So this is House Bill 1092. Do you think it's a good idea?
I do. I think we've been needing it for a while. This is one of those conversations last year that are becoming legislation this year. And if you guys remember, last year at the 420 event at Civic Center Park, there were over 200 citations and people were receiving fines and penalties for essentially consuming marijuana on April 20th.
There have always been so many tickets and citations at that event alone that I think even one city council member at one point considered a single day, what was it called? A single day, hey, let's take this public consumption law off the books for one day.
Exactly.
But that never went down, of course.
No, but this might be the way of doing it. And what they're proposing is essentially allowing a store to have off-site permitted sales, which is a good idea because you have testing around these products and it's not just a BYOB free-for-all, but instead people are selling regulated products that would otherwise be sold in the store, but allowed to be at the 420 event, either the Cannabis Cup or any other style event of that nature. And so they have the ability to get permission from the state government. And then they have to, of course, file with the local government.
Sure.
So some local governments still have control over this to allow it or not. But certainly I think it would reduce the number of issues if we had permitted events like we do for beer festivals or for street fairs at the same sort of level that we do for cannabis, and that normalization and safety of the public. So this requires things like security and checking IDs, which in the past has never occurred at Civic Center Park, for example.
Yeah, and we were talking about this last April with the Cannabis Cup. You know, as you know, MED kind of came down and said, if you're a marijuana licensed business in Colorado, there's no free sampling. And, you know, really that's what the Cannabis Cup is all about. It's free samples, and then Colorado businesses felt that they were at a disadvantage because all these California kids and, you know, Washington people came in and sampled and straight out sold in many cases. So do you think that stands a chance? I mean, what's the current political climate around a bill like that?
You know, I think it stands a really good chance. Is principally for public safety. As we look at social use and social consumption, Colorado Springs, that has a number of different cannabis clubs last year on April 20th, had 0 issues when it came to public consumption. So Denver has 200 and something. We have to look at this. We have to resolve it. The real question comes into play in terms of the other folks at the stakeholder table and whether or not they're going to be okay with a $150 application fee or a $100 fine versus a $1,000 fine maximum for the event. When you look at that compared to the regulatory code and the level at which we hold these businesses accountable, any licensee can have fines up to $100,000. So it's a big difference, and I think you're going to definitely have some pushback on parts of the bill. But I think in general you'll have the consensus, and hopefully it does pass. I think it's a step in the right direction.
All right, let's move on to another bill. This one's 16-1079, which would require the Colorado Department of Agriculture to devise a program in which independent companies, such as your company, iComply, or another one, could certify which cannabis is free of pesticides. So do you think this is a good step forward, or is it not enough? And I'm especially interested in your response because you run a compliance company. So
Sure.
is this enough? Is this a good step forward?
Well, I definitely think we have to do something. Over the last year, 2 years, we've been plagued with a lot of issues around pesticides, whether or not it's safe for the public, and certainly the conflict with federal law.
Sure.
That you can't have pesticides approved on-label use for marijuana because it's a Schedule I substance.
At least active ingredient pesticides, yeah.
Exactly, and even though there's science that maybe proves that certain pesticides are completely inert after a certain number of days, we haven't even been able to take that into consideration in this industry. So the Colorado Department of Agriculture put out a list of approved pesticides, and they're all basically organic pesticides. We also have rules in the regulations that say that we have to list all non-organic pesticides that are used. So it's kind of a moot point, but with regard to this bill, I think it's a great idea to at least let consumers know that you can label pesticide-free and that has some sort of standards behind it. And right now the conversation is, what should those standards be? Because we're not allowed to have U.S. Department of Agriculture standards around organic labeling, for example. And we can't even use the word organic because of federal law.
Right.
So this might be the right step in the right direction to model a lot of those same standards. For example, we're representing Clean Green, which is from the West Coast. They've been doing USDA modeled organic standards in the cannabis industry, calling it Clean Green for the last 12 years.
Sure, so it wouldn't be certified organic because marijuana can't be.
Exactly.
But it would be certified Clean Green, and that means something per their certifications.
And the state would agree. And
Yeah.
I think that that's where this bill is heading, and I think it's doing something, which is better than doing nothing. Whether or not it's enough, we have many more legislative sessions to come.
I want to bring James back into the conversation. You know, you guys and I were talking before the taping, and you know, people are still being thrown in jail less than 100 miles from here for minor possession charges. Yet here in Denver, sometimes we find ourselves arguing about, hey, I should be able to vaporize on the sidewalk in front of the bar if I want to. So this is kind of a lot bigger picture question, but do you think us as Coloradans, are we taking our legal rights for granted? Have we forgotten how lucky we are? James, why don't we start with you?
You know, to some, we are lucky. Definitely, we're lucky. But I don't think we need to, you know, be sitting back and being like, oh yes, well, you know, we're just going to do exactly what, and people are going to walk around in Denver and smoke joints on the sidewalk. That's going to happen regardless if there's
Sure.
the rules for it or not. They're going to vaporize in bars. I mean, go into other cities, you see how much more open and free that people are. In New York City, you know, you can't walk a block in the East Village without seeing someone smoke a joint.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's that, you know, we need to be like, oh, these, you know, everyone else can't do it, so we got to really set the model example. I think as we move forward, as Coloradans, we're implementing it into our lifestyle, into our yoga, and it's more about wellness. It's not just about where people can get high. It's about how are you bringing something positive to your day-to-day lifestyle. And you walk around, you know, Denver these days, and you know, there's some struggles out, but there's a lot of people that are pretty excited about what's going on in the food and the art and all of the culture that just feels like it's being, you know, rocket propelled into, you know, into something completely new. So I think it's going to keep changing and evolving, and it's not just, you know, it's not just a rebrand of cannabis. It's how do people really use these things, and how does it work in their everyday life? And other people should look at that and, you know, and see something to strive for.
Yeah, that conversation is definitely happening. You know, I see it every day as well. Mark, what do you think? I mean, are we taking our legal rights for granted?
No, not at all. When we have those rights, it's much easier to lose them than ever get them. And there have been people that have been fighting for this over 80 years, 20 million arrests. We aren't doing enough. For me, we have a unique opportunity in Denver, a unique opportunity here in Colorado to truly regulate this like alcohol, and to the extent that it's as socially accepted. And until that day is here, I think we have a lot more work to do, and we have to keep pushing the limits. And that is what you do with your rights. You don't lay back and say enough is enough, we've already gotten there. You fight for those social clubs. You fight for that business equality. 280E tax issues, banking issues. We still have a long way to go. And just because we have those privileges now doesn't mean we're going to let them go. Instead, we show people what's possible in other states, and we continue to get the momentum so that other folks around this country are encouraged by what we're doing, and we lead. I think that's what we do.
Colorado leads. All right. You guys are clearly passionate about the issue, and I wouldn't say that either of you guys are taking this for granted, because you're clearly pushing things forward. So it is the time in the program where we have a little pop quiz. All right. A little bit of marijuana trivia, current events. James, you ready? We're starting with you.
Yeah.
All right. So extreme sports and music are two things that are often associated with cannabis. But thanks to strict consumption laws in Colorado, what event recently called off its planned vape party?
That would have been the X Games. I believe.
Nice. Well done. The Winter X Games in
yes.
Aspen, Colorado. Yeah. Did you read that story?
I did just
hear
read the
about
story.
it, or-
Yeah. And it's, I mean, it seemed like it should have been something that happened easy enough. Every one of those, events is always so cool. And, like, the real danger is the guys that are participating in the events, not everything else that's going around. But I'm sure they're still going to have fun up there. I think just because one party's closed, a few other
They might find a way.
Yeah,
they might find a way.
That's
Okay.
what edibles are for.
Exactly, yeah. All right, Mark, you're next up. Name the comedian and former late night host who recently tweeted, "The smell of marijuana in this Uber car is overpowering."
Oh boy. I don't know that I got that one. Former
Comedian and former late night host.
late night host. Wasn't Conan O'Brien, was it?
He's still a late night host.
Oh, he is.
But everybody forgets about
I'm
him because
usually
he's on
working
like
late
TBS.
night. I know.
No worries. Good guess. And we're going to James for the steal.
Man, I'm
Any ideas?
former late show host, Letterman.
Letterman, good guess too. Not quite. I think a lot of people have forgotten about this guy, named Arsenio Hall.
Oh my God, that's a way long time
hear
ago.
about that. Yeah.
Yeah, he tweeted that, and he was in D.C., a pot legal district, and Uber customer service saw it, even though he didn't tag them, and they said, "This is simply unacceptable. Send us your DM us your email address that your account is under, and we'll take care of this immediately." Arsenio refused to narc on his drivers, so for what it's worth.
So it was a comment in the positive direction, not a complaint.
Yeah. I think he said it was the first time he laughed all day.
That's
so he was
awesome.
just like, this is funny. Probably the same thing I would think if an Uber driver picked me up, so long as they weren't totally, hotboxing the car before they picked me up.
You tip Uber drivers here in Colorado in pot, right?
Yes.
At least I've been doing it for a couple of years.
I know. Hey, here's a gram. James, which South American country just opened the largest cannabis farm in Latin America?
Uruguay?
You would think.
No?
You would think.
No,
As
this
the
one.
first country to go federal legalization and then totally stall on sales, but
Yeah, I was just there actually, and it was
Yeah.
kind of sad to go talk to the taxi drivers in Montevideo, and nobody knows where the secret cannabis clubs are, and it's a sort of an underground thing. And the pharmacies talking to them, they
Sure.
are afraid to do it as well. I mean, you got $1 guarantee from the government to buy your cannabis, only 2 grow contracts issued, so it's still got its problems on rollout. But to answer your
That's a
question,
disaster.
Chile.
Chile, yes. Good call. Wow, you pulled that one out. Nice, Mark.
He was just buying himself time to think with that long answer.
I'm actually half Brazilian, speak Spanish and Portuguese. Latin American reform is a really big
okay.
passion of mine for the social injustice that's been going on in the drug war down there for decades.
Absolutely. We'll have to talk after the show. I was in Uruguay in 2014.
Well, that's awesome.
When they still thought that it was going to be in every pharmacy by the end of the year. And here we are in 2016, and that's still not on. But don't you think it was like the transition from Mujica to Vasquez, and that a lot of it got lost right there. This was Mujica's passion.
Yeah.
It was not his the guy who took his place afterwards.
We should definitely talk about it.
All right. Last question of the pot quiz. We're starting with Mark. The leader of a cannabis church in what state said she was granted religious permission to use a marijuana extract in a ceremony just outside the state capital?
Wisconsin.
That is a good guess, but it's not Wisconsin. This just happened. James, for the steal.
Idaho?
I like it, but
Just
no,
say
this is
states.
Rhode Island, USA.
Okay, thinking west.
I was thinking some state with those protect the religious freedom type acts.
I
and,
know, you would think,
went for
right?
Wisconsin.
I know Indiana had that cannabis church action going down last year, but yeah, this is Rhode Island where the legislature might be legalizing it without the people this year. We'll see what happens there. Thank you guys. This has been a lot of fun. I do want to say thanks to our guests, James Kennedy and Mark Slaugh. Thanks to you all for watching and listening. Tell your friends about the Cannabist Show podcast. It's super easy to find on iTunes. Props to my producers, Vince, Dane, Eric, the rest of the crew. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you next week.
To show the sound of truth, I'm allowed to lose the truth to win. I'm all in, I'm calling any posse you'll be raising at the end. I say it again, ain't afraid to get in. I'll be going for the jackpot with aces in my hand, I'm raw.